is ended. The Atari 8-bit podcast.
So easy that it actually was very annoying that Atari themselves never would release these games on the 800.
I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Glenn Botts is better known to Atari 8-bit users as Glenn the 5200 Man. Glenn was perhaps the most widely known Atari software cracker because he had a unique specialty. Most pirates removed copy protection from software, making it so it was copyable and able to be shared for free. Glenn's skill was in taking games that were designed for the Atari 5200 game system and converting them so they would run on Atari 8-bit computers. Many of the games created for the Atari 5200 were not released for the computers, so Glenn's system conversion cracking had the unique effect of creating games for the Atari computers that otherwise would not have existed. The Atari 5200 was very similar in architecture to the Atari computers, but not 100% compatible. For one thing, the 5200 cartridges physically didn't fit into the Atari computers. Also, the joysticks were very different, with the 5200 using analog joysticks and the computers using digital joysticks. This is the first time that Glenn's identity has been revealed to the general public. This interview took place September 11th, 2015. I guess my question for you, first of all, is it okay to use your name, or do you still want to be anonymous?
I don't think it's going to hurt. It's not like people will be pestering me for 8-bit stuff anymore.
There might be some people who want you to join the forums and come talk and join an Atari forum or two. You might get a little. Okay, so it's okay if I use.
Yeah, I mean it's not going to hurt to get a few of those.
Okay, great. All right, so where should we start? Can you tell me the beginning of the story on how you first got involved with the Atari computers and the 5200?
Well, back in high school, I had my first experience with a computer. It was a fairly primitive system, had BASIC and a few enhancements that someone had hacked into it. He happened to work at the school that it was operating from and got access and started creating a few programs. And I got a little bit of interest from that. And then I started in college. I was going for electrical engineering, but a second major with computers and programming. And then nearby, University of Maryland, was a store called the Mathbox. And they happened to have the Atari computers. So I'd go in there occasionally. I'd play with them. Eventually I got one. And learned more on my own than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I actually worked for a while at Mathbox. Let me, buy some stuff at lower cost.
Mm-hmm.
And they had the Atari manuals that, they were, unlike most places, they actually published the operating system in the source code. So it was possible to learn how things work. And that was very helpful in starting to understand how the programs in the system operated. And over the years, I just sort of hacked at various things, got a hold of various programs, and didn't like the way some of them operated. So I started writing my own little enhancements for compressing the files. And then I wrote a program called Mini-DOS, which was basically a small DOS loader for running games, not actually operating as a full-functioning DOS. And from there, quoted another thing called SuperCart, which basically allowed you to dump the raw cartridges onto a file. It would move the screen down out of the way, and then load the cartridge in its normal location, put a little hack underneath it to operate for the reset and so forth, copy the the area of the cart that would be damaged by the screen reopening on reset down below the cartridge, and it would move it back and move the screen out of the way each time you do a reset. And that's what led actually into the 5200s. One day I got a call from somebody who happened to have some of the 5200 games. The one that they were most interested in was the one that would be the hardest to do, and that was baseball. And that's because it really took advantage of the 5200's joystick, which was a potentiometer based, so it was variable. And it, the farther out you pull the stick, the lower the bat would go, and then you'd swing it around to simulate swinging the bat. And without some hack and also access to the actual sticks to modify them to maybe use the potentiometer or the knob controllers on actually two of the ports, it wouldn't have been possible to do. Mm-hmm. And it would also require that the range of the bat was the same as the knob. So I never really got that one to work. But I learned a little bit about how they operated and eventually got a hold of some of the others, Miss Pac-Man among others. Mm-hmm. And at first I had to decompile them to get an idea of how they operated, what the differences was between the 5200 and the 800. And it turned out that there was very little. They had moved a few of the variables in the 200 range. And, of course, the keyboard didn't exist on the 5200. It was just a small keyboard on the actual controller. Mm-hmm. And so once I learned that and learned the difference of where the calls to the OS would be, where the character set was not at the beginning of the E000, which it was for the 800, but it was, I think, F00 or E8, something like that. So, of course, I had to adjust the parameters within the game mm-hmm. to point to the correct values. And then I basically used the same technology I used for running the cartridges to run it. So all I had to do was just add my little cartridge tag to maintain reset and the functionality. And then I had to find, of course, in the games, the place where it was doing its keyboard work and its joystick mm-hmm. and replace those routines with something that would look at the standard controller of the computer. Mm-hmm. And once I got that, I was able to basically write my own little shortcut routine that would act like a smart and decompiler, and it would look through the program for any possible instructions that would be pointing either or calling the OS or would be accessing the variables that needed to be modified. Mm-hmm. And then all I had to do was then go use a disassembler and look in those small sections to make sure it wasn't reading garbage code as potential source code. Once I determined which ones needed to be patched, again, it became very simple to then run an overlay that would patch the cartridge. And then, like I say, the only other part that required the extra effort was finding the keyboard and joystick routines mm-hmm. to replace them. So it became a straightforward pattern after I had done a couple of them. They were fun to do, but once I knew how, it was fairly easy, and it was so easy that it actually was very annoying that Atari themselves never would release these games on the 800. It's like it were effectively 800 games with very little change. Mm-hmm. So it got us a few more games in the process.
Yeah, for sure. So how did you physically initially get the data off the 5200 and over to your, was it an 800 or whatever model you had?
I never had the actual cartridges myself.
Mm-hmm.
It was the people that were contacting me with them.
Mm.
Basically, they'd pull the EEPROM out of the cartridge and put it on a reader
Mm-hmm.
and read it, since, of course, you couldn't plug it directly into the computer to read it.
Sure.
However they were managing to do it, all I got was the raw dump of the ROM.
On a floppy disk or something?
I actually usually it was just sent to me over the modem.
Oh, okay. So were these from Atari, people who worked at Atari?
Not that I'm aware of. It's certainly possible that some of them knew people at Atari,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't believe any of them directly worked for Atari.
Interesting.
At least they never admitted if they were.
So, okay. So how did you get in contact with these people, or did they?
They contacted me.
Okay.
I was known because I had put out some of the things like I say, the Supercart and Mini DOS and a few other things.
Mm-hmm.
So through various channels, they found me, and I was like, okay, why not? I'm up for a challenge.
So after you got into the flow of things, how long would it take you to convert something?
After I'd done a couple of them,
Yeah.
I could usually do it in a single day or less, a couple hours.
Yeah. And how old were you at this time?
Probably the early 20s.
Wow.
Mid-20s at the latest, I think, when I was doing them.
So you said that baseball, you couldn't do baseball mostly because of the analog joystick. Were there any others that you had to give up on?
No. Everyone else was easy to do.
Yeah.
Because that was the only one that really used the variable joystick. There was one other one that somewhat used it, but I could sort of get around it.
Mm-hmm.
I forget which one it was at this point, but I was able to make it work without the analog. You just lost some of the functionality that you might have gotten with an analog. You couldn't speed up or slow down. I think you could just only go the one speed.
Right. How did you initially get the idea in the first place, the mental leap of, I'm going to take something that's on the 5200 and move it to the 800? Do you remember?
Like I said, they called me with it and said, can you do it?
Oh, I see. They just saw you.
I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
My assumption would be, because it was the same processor and the same company and basically using the same graphics systems, that it should be possible.
Mm-hmm.
But until I looked at it, there was no way of really understanding how it operated. And then, like I say, once I did, and I saw that it was very close to the same OS, just a lesser capable version of the operating system, it wasn't that difficult, because they didn't use variables that would have otherwise conflicted with the computer. You know, they had put their interrupts in different locations than the computer used, like the NMI and IRQ variables had have been in some place else, and then they moved something else into that place, then I could have had conflicts and would have potentially had to move them around. The only ones, like I say, that really required moving around but weren't difficult because they weren't competing for that memory usage for other purposes were like the color variables and things like that. I had to go relocate them. Had they been trying to actively use the rest of 200 and redefined it for other purposes that overlapped the computer, then it could have been a lot more difficult, because I would have had to find ways of getting each piece out of the way or disabling some functionality of the computer.
So the Supercart was basically a cartridge copier?
No, it wasn't a cartridge copier. It was a cartridge player. It was basically the Mini DOS that all you would have to do is for a file would have the raw image of a cartridge. So you'd have something that would load from, the 8,000 or the 8,000 location into the rest of the cartridge space, and it could run it. So and basically, like I say, what it did was it would move the screen out of the way, so the cartridge could load there. Otherwise, if you loaded the cartridge, it would right over top of the screen. You'd get noise, and then when you'd reset, it would destroy that area of the cartridge because the screen would reopen at the highest point in memory.
Right.
So that's why I had to copy that part of the cartridge down below the standard cartridge area and protect it. And my little tag code would go down in there, would set itself as the reset code, so that when you hit reset, it would jump back to my code, and my code would then, like I say, move the screen back down, restore that section of the cartridge, and then would continue to do the rest of the operating system initialization as needed, and then jump to the cartridge as if there was a physical cartridge there.
Did you work on any other projects, SuperCart, Mini-DOS, and anything else?
Like I said, did some stuff that wasn't released out in the world that I was using, like my decompilers and hack codes and things like that. Actually, one of the people that I taught how to, crack programs, actually went on to make a program to try to protect against people cracking the code. Because I basically taught them, all the flaws that other programs were making and why, they failed, and then of course, what makes it more difficult? What kind of steps you can do that, for a programmer, when you're trying to follow them, make it exceedingly difficult to figure out all the junk that's occurring before the program actually runs. And he made a fair go at it. So he was selling that to a number of people.
Nice. And do you know what that product was?
At the moment, I cannot remember the name of it.
So after you hacked, do you know how many 5200 games you converted about? I was trying to find a list online, and I don't think I could find anything that's like a definitive list.
And it's been so long that I really don't remember. I would say between 10 and 20.
Yeah. So after you hacked a game, how did you get it back? How did you get it out into the wild? Did you send it to the person who sent you the original ROM?
Well, yeah, they would always get it. That was part of the reason why they were sending it to me. And then I had some other friends and stuff like that I'd give it to, and it wind up on bulletin boards, and very quickly spread from there.
How did you come, any particular story to coming up with the name Glenn, the 5200 man?
No, just the fact that a lot of people were putting tags on when they do hacking or cracking of programs. And so I figured, what the heck? Why not do it myself? And I just threw that out there for the heck of it, and let it go where it would.
Did you? Was any worry about being found out by the wrong people?
That's the reason why I don't even say Glenn.
Yeah.
But at that point, people really weren't pursuing or trying to prosecute people for cracking, so it wasn't a major concern.
From my perspective, as a kid who was pirating software, and among the kids that I know, and even I looked around the Atari forums, you were kind of a legend. It seemed like you were doing magic. Did you know this at the time? Did you have a sense of that at the time, that people were kind of in awe of what you were doing?
Oh yeah. That's part of the reason why I didn't go around overly advertising myself, because I did not want to be, constantly harassed by everybody that wanted to get a hold of me.
Mm-hmm.
I let other people that wanted to be active on the channels, releasing the software and going to other sites and so forth. Let them front the stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and I just, stay out of the way.
Yeah.
Because, even then, of course, it's back in the days with only the 300 and the 1200 baud modems.
Mm-hmm.
It could take, an hour or so to send a decent-sized program between one person and another. You can imagine trying to send a massive amount of data.
Right.
So I wasn't interested myself in doing that. I'd rather go over to somebody's house with a stack of disks
Right.
and just copy the disks.
Right.
In fact, that was actually one of the other things where you do say, did I do other stuff? So, like with Mini-DOS, when they came out with the Happy Drive,
Mm-hmm.
and I got a hold of one of those, I looked at how the code was working, and then I added that to my Mini-DOS and the Supercart programs, so that they were fast and easy to work with. And then they came out with a couple other ones. I think it was Ultra or something, which was just the high speed, but not the buffering of the entire track like the Happy Drive did.
Mm-hmm.
And then a second item that was similar to the Happy Drive, which was the Turbo. I got a hold of one of those and enhanced and did the same thing, and then added its code to mine so that it could work with that drive and its high-speed transfer, because it could also do something that the Happy Drive didn't. And unfortunately, I don't have it anymore. I let somebody borrow it, and we swapped drives, and I never got my Turbo Drive back.
Oh, man.
And another thing which I did, I had a friend that liked to do the soldering. So I had one of the RAM disks, and we took it and replaced all the memory with double or 4 times the space, I believe, actually. And, of course, it's a rat's nest of wires, because all the, when the original chips all fit in sockets, but, of course, the new chips had 4 pins outside of the sockets. Mm-hmm. So you got a little rat's nest of wires going across, and then had to add our own little collector chip to recognize the addressing that the extra pins were giving us. And I wrote my own RAM disk controller, which was much faster and more reliable than the original code.
Mm-hmm.
And then, later we got a hold of one of the debuggers that fit in the C000 location, 4K, but it had a switch to flip between one part of it and another, and it would come up with a little text message telling you each time you needed to flip. So you type a different command, and oops, I got to flip to the other half. So when we put that on my machine, we put in a multi-layer functionality of having a switch that I could have extra 4K of memory and get 52K of memory, or it could just be running at 48, or the debugger could be in there. And then I hacked the debugger so that instead of asking for you to flip the switch, it would attempt to do it electronically if you had the switch in the correct position, in which case it would then auto-flip between its sections. And if not, then it would prompt you to switch it, so you could have it in manual or automatic mode. And that was useful for debugging and cracking other programs, because then I could pop into it and use it to capture code.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably, if you had a look around at different programs, and I didn't usually add my tag when I did this, but a lot of times people would dump the things, especially the Electronic Arts games.
Mm-hmm.
And they would be a huge file because it would be almost all of memory. And I would look at these stupid files, and you'd have huge swaths of empty space because the way the compilers worked. You know, you'd allocate a play field or data areas, and then instead of leaving a gap in the program, the compiler would fill in an area full of all zeros.
Mm-hmm.
So you could wind up where half the file or more was empty space.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote my own little routine that would recognize if it could save enough out of the file to do it, and then it would run a tiny little tag that would load up, clear out the memory that this program was going to load into, so it was all zeros.
Mm-hmm.
So just in case the program actually needed the zeros, because I found some did. And then it would load the program in tiny little fragments of only what was actually data, and leave all the empty zero spaces without having to be loaded from the file. So it dramatically sped up the loading of the programs, but also saved a significant amount of disk space. And of course, in those days, with the 88K floppies, anything you could save was well worth it.
So it sounds like you hacked a lot of 8-bit stuff that was native to the computer as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was one of the things I enjoyed with that system. I mean, it was an easy enough system, because the 6502 code is not that extensive
Mm-hmm.
of a functionality, which of course limited some of its abilities, but it made it easy to decipher and figure out what it was doing. Also made me, at that time, not a very big fan of some of the higher level languages. When you could sit there and you look at what it actually would compile into,
Mm-hmm.
you'd realize just how inefficient these programs were.
Yeah.
And of course, you had to do that. The hardest ones to do were like P code, which was, Fortran was compiled into P code, and a couple others, because you couldn't read them. You'd have to know what the interpreter was doing, so you'd actually have to let the interpreter decode chunks of code, and then to try to find when it's actually doing something that either was not functioning right, or crashing, or doing protection checks or anything like that.
Do you have an Atari computer anymore?
Yeah, I still have it. Haven't used it in a long time. One of the things I really had wanted but never got around really to trying to figure out how to do, and getting the equipment necessary, would be a routine that would allow me to transfer at very high speeds or read the disks into a standard computer, so you could burn them onto the programs onto CD-ROM, because floppy disks don't last forever.
That's true.
And the worst thing is I've got a whole ton of them, and it's quite likely that half or more of them are no longer readable, because there'll be degradation in the media, or just or even the surface is starting to fall off of the disk, so that there's nothing to read.
Well, I have archived hundreds of Atari disks in the last year. I'm part of a group of people who are trying to, for instance, archive all of the Atari Program Exchange disks, and of course, people have always interested in archiving their old data and games and things. You'd be surprised how many disks are still readable. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. I use a gadget called SIO to SD, and then you can basically copy a disk to an SD card, and then you can move it to your modern computer. If you have anything you want archived, if you want to send me your whole stack of disks, I would be happy to archive it all for you and send it back to you privately or share it or whatever, however you want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you can send me the information. I can certainly go through them and see which ones especially the ones I've got labeled that might tell me what the heck they are.
Yeah, I mean, if you have any source code or the stuff you wrote privately for yourself that you never released, and might as well get it out there now.
Yeah. Well, that's also, like I say, one of the things which would make it nice would be not only the reader, but something that you could plug into the Atari that would, either connect to the network or, USB or whatever, so that, you could actually have a standard computer online and then treat that as a disk, so that, as far as the Atari is concerned, it's communicating with one of its disks,
right,
even though it's actually going to a computer, and you go over to the computer and you say, okay, now, load disk X, and then the Atari would see it, because...
Yeah, there's totally things like that. SIO to PC. There's a couple of solutions for that. Custom hardware and software that do pretty much what you're describing.
Well, I'll have to look that up, or if you've got some links for it, send it to me.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Because it's been a long time since I played with it and was looking at that, and at the time I couldn't find anything. So it's certainly possible somebody thought of the same thing but actually pursued it.
Yeah, no, there's a few solutions. I'll send you links when we're done. Yeah, if you want to, if you get that equipment and do it yourself because you're interested, great. And if you're not that motivated, then I'll be happy to archive your disks for you. But those things you were dreaming of, they're real. So what machine were you using back then that you still have? Was it an 800 or 130XE?
An 800.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, I preferred that over the 800 because I did not like the chiclet keyboard.
Oh, over the 400? Yeah.
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 And I also, at some point later, got one of the other models, the XLs or whatever that came out after it.
Mm-hmm.
But the 800 was always my favorite because that's what I had all my hacks and tricks into. So the XL didn't really provide anything other than, okay, hey, I've got a backup unit or spare parts.
Right. So how did your time hacking Atari come to an end? I mean, did you get interested in other computers, or?
Basically, it started fading away with that as the STs came out, and then I got an Amiga.
Mm-hmm.
Prefer that over the ST because it was true multitasking.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, originally, most people, I don't know how much they know the history, originally was Atari people that built the Amiga.
Right, yeah.
And then somehow Atari got sloppy and Commodore came along and stole it. And, of course, as a game company, could never really promote it. And it should have won out in comparison to both the Mac and the IBM if it had been promoted properly.
Mm-hmm.
It blew both of them away. True multitasking and everything else. Imagine it now with the processors we've got and the protected memory, and VMware and everything else that you could get. It would blow them away. It was, a much better design because it was designed for actual multitasking from the beginning, not CPU sharing like the PC was, and that's the reason why the PC, even today, you run one little program and oops, it hangs, and you watch everything else start to hang up or the whole machine come to a grinding halt because they still continue to emulate that garbage software that they started off with because they refused to rewrite the operating system to a true multitasking operating system.
Yeah.
And when you start doing low-level programming, which I had to do when writing the DOS and stuff like that, it drives you nuts to work on systems where, you do something and it just goes off to Never Land, or the stuff's not documented. You take the computers like, Windows, and you hit a key on there, one of their hotkeys. And I've had one computer that did this, and it would take a minute to 2 minutes before it would come back and actually do something. So like your Windows E key could take 2 minutes to load an Explorer window. And the machine would come to a grinding halt until this completed, because who knows what had tapped in and was going nuts. And, it's undocumented, so you can't go, here's how things work, here's why they work, like they did with the Atari. And I really miss that.
Yeah. What do you do today?
Programmer at NIH, and working today with IP management software,
Cool.
Various reporting software.
I have a feeling you have an interesting story that I haven't heard yet. Tell me a story, Glenn, about the Atari days.
One of the things, which was when I first was getting started with programming and stuff like that, I could go with hours and hours on it, get into hacking, or when I was writing mini-DOS and stuff like that, you just go on and on and on for hours, all night long. And suddenly, oh wait, it's morning. Don't really have that same love with the current computers and that I did with that, and that's something I miss. Even some of the games that we had at the time, the regular arcade type of games. So many of the games now are these massive 3D worlds where you run around and you look at these things and you go, you have to remember patterns for what the rooms are, because you really can't recognize the sites easily enough to go, have a feel of where you are. You have to just sort of play them and run them around and learn where somebody can hide to shoot at you and everything else. I miss the simpler games. Even a game, Star Raiders. And all the years since, nobody's ever made one that was as nice as that.
Yeah.
I mean, either you could improve the graphics on it, but you don't see those type of things anymore. I mean, and that's unfortunate. I mean, it's nice to have things improve and have extra power, but a lot of the games, of course, like on the PC, you play with the keyboard. I'd much rather prefer the simple, small joystick for some of the games. But when you do have the joysticks, they're complex, and not all of the games support them because it's not a standard feature of the operating system. Over the years, it's sort of, unfortunately, as we were forced into the Microsoft world because business went with Microsoft, and then people had to buy Microsoft because, I'm using it at work. So what? Can you read the program and use the files on other machines? Then what do you want PC for? But, the rest of the world didn't go that way. So all the other machines sort of faded away, and, you no longer have the new software and the people programming for it. There's just not a market there.
Right.
And so I don't deal with it as much as I used to. Plus, when you work on them at work, you come home, and one of the last things you really want to do is work on a computer again.
Right. That's true. If you could send a message to the Atari computer community that still exists, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Well, I hope they're enjoying my the programs that I've put out there, and other systems that they can find, and keep supporting it.
Awesome.
Yeah, get some of the emulators for it, and maybe we can get some more of the stuff put on the computer, and you'll just be able to still use it as on your PC. I don't know how much you've played with the emulators.
All the time. Yeah.
Do you have one that you like for doing the Atari on the PC, or have you ever really seen one that worked well at it?
The two, I'm a Mac guy, but the two that I understand work on the PC, one is called Altera, and the other is Atari. It's just called Atari 800. And
it's been a while since the last time I played with some of those. And I don't recognize either of those two names at the time when I was last playing with them.
I'll send you links when we're done. But yeah, they're both fine emulators. I use the Mac version of Atari 800, and it works great. But I have a bone to pick with you and all the other pirates, I got to say, because now you guys did a great job at pirating all the games, because that's what you wanted to play. But now, today, in 2015, what has not been archived is like educational software, everything by Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium. It's still locked up on disks, and very few people now know how to crack it or care to if they do. So a lot of the history and use like educational and application software was never cracked.
Well, true. The games were the more popular, although I did other things as well when I came across them. But no one ever... There was one educational or documentation, something or other set that I did do at one point, but I don't recall the specifics of which one it was, because they weren't in high demand and didn't have people constantly requesting them.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Quite frankly, I mean, even with the emulators, I would think you'd be able to use that serial I/O thing that you were talking about and copy it to the computer and crack it on a standard PC or Mac by using the emulator.
I think that's probably possible. I would love to be able to do that, but even if you've got this code and you still have to find where it's looking for the bad sector or whatever magic it's doing, the copy protection's still there, and the art of defeating it is being lost. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's still, like, say, it'd be interesting to see whether any of these emulators have built in any of the debugger tools, like the one I was talking about, and basically treat it as part of the operating system.
Right. Yeah.
Then they certainly could, because then when you hit the reset, you could pop into the debugger and follow the code. And it's even now probably be possible with just a file dump of it to search for the calls, because most of the protections for most programs were very poor. It was just a straight, here we have a call for a bad sector, duplicate sector, or whatever that they were looking for. Once you get past that code, that was it. No further tests. The more intelligent ones would add code that would look back at the protection area and would recognize, oh, hey, something's changed there, and then start malfunctioning. But like I say, that was rare in most programs. So, all you have to do really is look for the calls for reading the disk, and look for a case where they were, doing the JSR to the E456 or whatever it was for reading the disk, and then looking for a return code that was a 189. I think that was the value for the bad sector. So it's actually looking for just a small piece of code. So it would be possible even to do that with very little effort, depending on how complicated the code was.
Awesome. Well, you seem to remember how to do it. Maybe you can teach me one day. I want to save the rest of the software that hasn't been saved yet. If a listener would like to get in contact with you, is that okay? Can they talk to you on Twitter, or what do you prefer?
Yeah, I have Twitter and I have Facebook.
Okay.
So, either one.
Okay. What's your Twitter ID? I actually knew it at one point, but I thought I knew it. I don't know if it was the right you.
Yeah, Amiga_4000. All right, I'll have to look at the blog. Anyway, just see what else you have out there.
Yeah, we've done a lot of interviews, everything from Nolan Bushnell down to secretaries and like the guy who bought the cardboard for the game boxes, and we've talked to everything from middle managers to programmers, book authors. It's been a lot of fun talking to all these people.
Yeah, I was watching something, and I think it was probably a repeat, but it was one of those people that was trying to dig up the dump where Atari tossed away the E.T. game for the 2600 and a bunch of other cartridges rather than selling them for cheap or anything. It just, it's like, why? You could have sold them off to bulk dealers and at least made something out of it instead of just carting it off to a landfill.
Yeah. There's so many things they did that are beyond understanding.
Yeah, because like the 7800s was another thing. I got a 7800 machine, but it used a different CPU, so there wasn't a means to convert them easily to the 800. But even for the emulators, you could have an emulator for it, but Atari had a whole bunch of games for that, but they never released them. In fact, the games that I got, a number of them I got from people who had contacts at Atari, and we had to burn them to EEPROM ourselves in order to actually run them, because they were never released. Have to look to see if somebody's doing an emulator for that and has some of those, or whether they don't have all those games, and see if I still have the files anymore for it.
These were games for the 7800?
Yeah. There were a whole bunch of them that they never released.
Yeah. As
the game systems collapsed at that point. And then, of course, eventually came back with Nintendo and stuff like that. But Atari and some others that, unfortunately, I guess they figured everybody would move to computers and that game machines would go away, so they didn't really push the technology there, and then the Japanese did, and suddenly the market disappeared.
Yep.
And the American game companies all went under.
Yeah. Well, find those discs and see what you have, and we'll figure out if that stuff is been found from another source, or if you have the only copy left.
Yeah, if I have to remember where the heck it was, whether I saved it on the Atari ST or whether I had it on the Amiga or which ones I had gotten them, because it's been so long. But
Yeah.
I just remember having to do it and using the burners to get it. So,
Cool.
yeah. Who knows where they are now? I have them somewhere because I never fill them out.
Let me know what you find. Thank you so much, Glenn.
You're welcome.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.